The rain in Owari does not wash you clean. It grinds you down. I remember the mud of that year, 1566. It was thick, clinging to our sandals. And Nietzsche. Sir? Like the despair that had settled over the Oda clan. We were trying to take the province of Mino. The Circa. Tut. But the Sato clan held the riverbank like a vice. To cross the mighty Kiso River, we needed a foothold. On the enemy side, we needed a fortress. But building a castle under the nose of the enemy is impossible. Every general knew this. I was a lieutenant under the fierce Shibata Katsui. Twice we had tried to build fortifications at Sunomata, a marshy confluence of rivers. And twice the Sato archers and cavalry had descended upon us. Others call me. And cheer. Before we could even set the foundation stones. We were building our own tombs in the mud. The men were broken. They whispered that the land was cursed. Nature. That the river spirits rejected us. Then came the council. Lord Oda Nobunaga sat on his camp stool, his face a mask of irritation, tapping his iron war fan against his knee. The air was heavy with the smell of wet straw. And failure. Who? Nobunaga barked, his eyes scanning the bowed heads of his samurai. Who will build me this castle? Or must I go out there? Otherk. Odera. And piled the stones myself. Silence. To volunteer was to volunteer for disgrace. Then a voice chirped from the back. It was high. Othery. Sunkelme. Almost comical. I will do it, my lord. We turned. It was him. The monkey. Kinoshita. Tokichiro. He was a peasant by birth, small, ugly, and erratic. He wasn't even a proper samurai yet. Mother Nature. Merely a sandal, bearer who had clawed his way up to a minor administrative role. The veterans snickered. Sakuma Nobumori, a man of noble blood, laughed openly. You. Sakuma sneered. Where great warriors failed, a sandal bearer thinks he can succeed. How long will you need, monkey? A year. 10 years. Tokichiro bowed low, his face almost touching the tatami mats. Give me 7 days, my lord. The tent erupted in laughter. 7 days. It took 7 days just to dig the moats. This was madness. It was an insult to the art of war. But Nobunaga did not laugh. he stopped the tapping of his fan. He looked at the small man with intense curiosity. Nobunaga loved the impossible. "Do it," the warlord said. "But if you fail..." Other. Do not bother returning. I was assigned to watch him. Nature. Perhaps to document his failure. But what I saw in the following days was not the work of a madman. It was the work of an architect of chaos. Tokichiro did not march to the riverbank. Instead, he took his men into the deep forests upstream. Miles away from the enemy's sight. For days, the forest rang with the sound of axes. But they weren't just felling trees. Under Tokichiro's manic supervision, the carpenters were cutting beams, shaping joints, and assembling walls, and then taking them apart again. I watched him running between the fires, his clothes covered in sawdust, shouting orders. "Label every piece. Mark the joints! This fits with that!" He wasn't building a castle. He was building a giant puzzle. He recruited not just soldiers, but local bandits, ronin, and peasants, paying them in gold he had borrowed, begging and bargaining. He turned a military operation. Nature into a frantic festival of labor. On the 6th night, the storm came. It was a gift from the gods. Others call it there. Or perhaps the monkey had smelled it coming. The rain lashed down in sheets, turning the world gray and deafening. The enemy across the river would be huddled in their barracks. Others call blind and deaf to the world. Now! Tokichiro screamed over the thunder. It was a sight I shall never forget. Thousands of logs, tied together into rafts, were pushed into the dark, churning waters of the Kiso River. We rode the rafts downstream, fighting the current, the rain stinging our eyes like needles. We were an armada of wood. Nature. That's there. Drifting silently past the enemy watchtowers. Some call me Mother Nature. Hidden by the deluge. When we crashed onto the muddy banks of Sunomata, there was no rest. Up. Up. Dig. Hammer! Tokichiro was everywhere at once. He didn't carry a sword. He carried a hammer. It was a ballot of mud and sweat. Because of the work done in the forest, there was no sawing, no measuring. Click, snap, hammer. The cut beams locked into place. The assembled walls were hoisted up with ropes. The sheer organization was terrifying. It was faster than humanly possible. It was as if the castle wanted to be built. I worked until my hands bled. Other. Caught up in the frenzy. We didn't feel fatigue. We felt the electric shock of the impossible becoming real. By the time the storm began to break, the skeleton of the fortress stood tall against the lightning. Then came the white paper. Tokichiro had brought thousands of sheets of white paper and plaster. We covered the wooden frames. Sane. Creating the illusion of solid, white, washed stone walls. Dawn broke. The rain stopped. The mist began to lift off the river, revealing the far bank. I stood on the ramparts, gasping for air, looking across the water. I saw the movement in the Sato camp. I saw the enemy soldiers emerging from their tents, rubbing sleep from their eyes. And then I saw them freeze. Where yesterday there had been only mud and reeds, today stood a castle. It gleamed white in the morning sun, its towers imposing, its banners snapping in the wind. From the enemy's perspective, it must have looked like magic. A fortress born from the night itself. Spirits must have built it. Demons. Panic rippled through the Sato lines. We could hear their shouts. Few. Of the call. Not of anger, but of fear. They didn't attack. How could they attack a foe who could summon castles from thin air? They retreated, their morale shattered. Others. Without a single arrow being fired. Tokichiro stood beside me, leaning on the railing, covered in mud from head to toe. He looked exhausted, small, and utterly triumphant. He pulled a persimmon from his sleeve and took a bite. "You see, Lieutenant," he said, winking at me. "War is not just about swords. It's about changing what the enemy believes is true." That day, the one-night castle of Sunomata became a legend, and the man who built it ceased to be a sandal bearer. On that muddy bank, the peasant died. Other. And the great unifier of Japan was born. The story of Sunomata Castle is a masterful example of the Stoic discipline of action and the power of perception. While other generals focused on the obstacle, the enemy will shoot us if we build. Hideyoshi focused on the solution, build where they cannot see, assemble where they cannot stop. Stoicism teaches us that we should not complain about the difficulty of the task, but rather use our logos, reason, to find a path through it. Hideyoshi did not brute, force the problem. He thought it. He turned the chaotic storm, an external circumstance that others would see as a hindrance, into a tool for stealth. Moreover, the story highlights Epictetus's idea that men are disturbed not by things, but by the view which they take of them. The enemy army was not defeated by stone walls, which were actually flimsy wood and paper, but by their impression of the walls. Hideyoshi understood that the mind is the true battlefield. By controlling the narrative and demonstrating impossible capability, he won without bloodshed. It is a reminder that in life, preparation and ingenuity often outweigh raw power.